Okay, so this is the last part of European nationalism, and we're going to look at Eastern Europe specifically. So we've already talked about this before, but like Austria is this empire which is made up of all these different nationalities, and it's really hard to administer. I mean, there are many different languages spoken. There's different religions, different customs, and the only thing that really unites this conglomerate is the house of the Habsburgs. So the Habsburgs, of course, are the emperor of Austria. Okay, and this is the Austrian Imperial flag, and this is the Habsburg I'm talking about. This is Franz Joseph. Now he begins his rule in 1848, and the reason why he begins in 1848 is because remember, in 1848, Austria was going through some hard times. The city of Vienna was in revolt. The Hungarian part of the Austrian Empire becomes independent for a while, anyways. And so the old emperor, and then the guy who was ruling, like the chancellor, Metternich, Prince Metternich, he's forced to flee, and so the old emperor abdicates, and he puts his cousin, Franz Joseph, who is Catholic. He's very conservative. He gets the Hungarian part of his empire back under control with the aid of the Russians. So that's who this is. Okay. Now, in 1867, what we're going to end up with is what's called the Compromise of 1867. This is where we end up with a dual monarchy. So last year, when you were learning about World War I, you probably heard of Austria-Hungary. And that is because the Austrian Empire will now be recognized as being two parts. There's an Austrian part and a Hungarian part. Now, Franz Joseph is the Emperor of Austria and the King of Hungary. Okay? And that's how it's going to be from 1867 until its dissolution in, I think it's 1918 or 1919. But we also have the Russians. So this is the Russian imperial flag. And Russia had been stopped in its ambitions here in Crimea, in the Black Sea, but they continued to push for expansion into Central Europe, and this brought them into competition with the British. And then they continued to push east in this region right here, and they build a city, Vladivostok, and they'll build the Trans-Siberian Railroad, and this will position future Russian Tsars into acquiring land here in China. But it's also going to set the Russians up for conflict with Japan. So this is Nicholas I, and he's going to rule Russia from 1825 to 1855. He's an autocrat. He's an absolutist. He's all about the Orthodox Church and being the head of it. He's all about nationalism. He's very pro-Russia. Then you have his son, who takes over, Alexander II. He's going to be defeated in the Crimean War, so that stops his ambitions in that region. But he's going to be reflective. He's going to emancipate the Russians. I'm sorry, I said the Russians. The Serbs. In 1861 to 1863, he begins to change things in Russia. Not to a great deal, but I mean, he is somebody is modernizing the country. So there's going to be pushback whenever you're doing things that are changing things. And emancipation of the serfs was like a big deal. This changes things for the aristocracy in Russia, but it also means that Russia is going to begin to industrialize and modernize, but very slowly. Now, unfortunately for Alexander II, is he will be assassinated. And when he is assassinated, it's by a bomb. And that person who blows himself up also blows up Alexander II. Like, he loses his legs, and it's a really awful, terrible thing that happens. And his successor is his son, Alexander III. And he is reactionary to this. He sees that part of the problem that led to his father's assassination was he felt his father was soft, so he takes the opposite approach. He's the hard guy, right? So he cracks down. He uses the Cheka. Remember, that's the secret police. Rounds up people. He's a Slavophile, meaning like he's all about supporting greater Slavs. So these would be people in the Balkans. He's a Russification program. It's sort of like the education program, like we've talked about before, but it's like you know how here in the United States we have like America first. It's sort of like Russia first. It's the same idea. He's going to look for people to blame, and so he's going to find Russian Jews, and he's going to accuse them of all kinds of terrible things. And what he's going to do is he'll force them to leave urban areas or other places inside of Russia, and he will force them to this place called the Pale, which I'll show you in a minute. Now, he's going to get sick, and he'll die. He's not Tsar for very long, and his son will take over. And you know his son. His son is Tsar Nicholas II, and Alexander III's treatment of his son is really bad. Like we talked about the Prussian king during the Enlightenment and how he treated his son. Remember, his son tried to escape. Like his father was so bad, and his father ordered the execution of his tutor, like in front of him, and he imprisoned him and all sorts of stuff. Well, Alexander III was kind of equally bad to his son Nicholas II. He berated him. Nothing he did was ever good enough. There's a word, I don't think this is politically incorrect, but he sissified him. It was just not a good experience. So when Alexander III was doing all these things, it was probably just out of bullying and just cruelty, because Nicholas was not supposed to be the next Tsar. The guy who was supposed to be the next Tsar ends up dying, and so Nicholas becomes the Tsar by accident. I wouldn't say by accident, but it wasn't by design. So again, this is Russia's expanse in the Central Europe and over here, but this is the Pale right here. Okay, Warsaw, Kiev, Odessa. Another way to look at it is this way. Okay, so the Russians forced the Jews into the western regions of their country. Now, if you know anything, and you do know lots of stuff about World War II, when the Germans roll east into the Soviet Union, where do they find the Jews? In Poland, in this area. And what do? They put them in camps, and the Holocaust happens. So this thing that happens in 1881 to 1894 has it's not until 1945 that we know what the results of that are going to be. Okay, so history it's a slow process, but things that happened in the past have a huge impact later on. Then last is the Ottoman Empire. So by the late 19th century, it's got the nickname of the sick man of Europe. It's not really the sick man of Europe. I mean, it's not very powerful compared to what it had been, say, in previous centuries, but it's an old empire. It's losing control of fringe elements of its society. So we talked about how the French and the British sided with the Ottomans in this area in the Crimean War. This area right here, in pink, this was it had been taken by the Russians and the Russians were forced to give it back to the Ottomans. Well, within about 30 years, actually about 20 years, the Ottomans lose control of this and they become independent. Okay, Greece had become independent in the 1850s. Cyprus is taken from it by the British. So, and this would have been earlier, but it's not what it was. The Ottoman Empire has problems. It's a large empire, and it's shrunk over time. But it's got other priorities too. There are different competing Christian religions in this area right here, right? They have one Muslim religion right here, and it goes all the way down to this part too, by the way. So that's what we have. All right. So that's the end of this. What we're going to talk about next time is we'll talk about imperialism, and then we'll segue that right into World War I, and we'll be close to the end. So there we go. Thanks, guys.